So today we'll look at translation memories. So we'll discuss what a translation memory is, and we'll look at a tool, an online tool that uses translation memories. So a translation memory, and here we have a definition from Wikipedia. So a translation memory is a database that stores segments, which can be sentences, paragraphs, and sentence-like units, like headings, titles, or elements in a list, that have previously been translated, in order to aid human translators. The translation memory stores the source text and its corresponding translation in language pairs called translation units. Individual words are handled by terminology bases and are not within the domain of TM, which stands for translation memory, right? Okay, so let's recap. What is a translation memory? It's a database, right? So it's a collection of data, basically, which stores segments. So segments refers basically to strings of words, right? So it can be a phrase, it can be a sentence, even a paragraph, right? So pieces of text, basically, right? That have previously been translated. And of course, this is supposed to help human translators, people who actually do the translating. Okay, so these translations are stored. So we've got the source text and the corresponding translation, so the target text, in language pairs called translation units. Now, individual words are handled by terminology bases. So we've looked at terminology databases, right? So your glossary project was based on the idea. So there, we're dealing with individual words, sometimes phrases, but they are like lexical units, right? So things that you would find, for example, in a specialized dictionary, right? So basically, they are just terms, translations of terms, which can be individual words or some phrases. But here, a translation memory doesn't deal with that, right? A translation memory keeps real translations by people who have translated texts, basically. So it can be you from your previous translations, or it can be someone else. So you can use somebody else's database, basically, right? So the way it works is that the program or application that uses a translation memory will store all your translations, right? So it will store those phrases and sentences that you've previously translated, or someone else has previously translated, and then when you're translating another text, or even the same text, and the same kind of phrase or sentence appears, then it will suggest the translation. That's the general idea. Okay, so let's keep reading. Software programs that use translation memories are sometimes known as translation memory managers or translation memory systems, right? Yeah, so we'll look at an application that uses translation memories. Translation memories are typically used in conjunction with a dedicated computer-assisted translation tool, CAT tool. Word processing programs, terminology management systems, multilingual dictionary, or even raw machine translation output. I'm not sure how these translation memories would be used with a word processing program. Maybe there are some plugins, maybe some applications work with those translation memories. But we will look at CAT tools, right? So we look at a dedicated CAT tool, which actually uses So a dedicated tool for translation, basically, which uses these translation memories. And there is some information about companies producing documentation that use these memory systems. But let's look at the next section. So using translation memories. So this section explains basically how this process works. So we're not going to go into this now. If you're interested, you can read this section. So it talks about the process, right? And the next section is about benefits. So what are the main benefits? And there are quite a few benefits. Of course, it seems pretty obvious that when the tool helps you with the translation, makes some suggestions based on the previous translations, that this would be beneficial, right? But let's look at some of these. So the benefits include ensuring that the document is completely translated. I'm not sure about this. I mean, I don't know how this would work, because it says translation memories do not accept empty target segments. We'll see how this works in our tool, so I cannot say anything about this now. But the next point is quite important: ensuring that the translated documents are consistent, including common definitions, phrasings, and terminology. This is important when different translators are working on a single project, right? So if you're translating on your own or in a team, if you're translating a document and there is a certain phrase or expression or even a sentence, usually you will not translate the same sentence in the same way on two different occasions, right? So if you're translating a given, for example, sentence, especially if it's something longer like a sentence or a paragraph, the same sentence or the same paragraph will usually be translated differently depending on the translator, or even by the same translator on different occasions. So let's say you're translating a relatively long text, relatively long document, and you translate a certain sentence, and several pages later the same sentence crops up. You will most likely, or it's quite likely, that you will translate the sentence slightly differently, right? Because translation is quite a flexible, creative process, unless you're translating something very technical, where you've got very specified expressions, very specified terms that normally have only one translation, right? But I think it's pretty clear that different translators will not translate the same text in exactly the same way, right? So I'm sure you've got some experience with that. That's why in some cases it's important that those translations should be consistent, right? So you have one text in which you've got a certain phrase or a certain even sentence that is repeated. So ideally it should be translated in the same way. You shouldn't use different expressions, different terms in a different part of the document for the same phrase or the same sentence, right? So it helps you with that because it remembers the previous translation, right? I'm not sure about the next point. So let's move to the next one. Accelerating the overall translation process. That makes sense, right? Since translation memories remember previously translated material, translators have to translate it only once, right? So you translate a certain sentence or phrase once, and the next time you come upon this phrase, the previous translation will be offered, so you won't have to translate it again. You won't have to think about it again. And reducing costs, of course, when you talk about companies, teams of translators, and so on, because yeah, I mean, reducing time means reducing cost as well, right? So I think these are the most important points for us at this point. I mean, that's something that seems immediately beneficial, right? Of course, there are some drawbacks, some obstacles, right? So, of course, it all depends on the type of the text, because the concept of translation memories assumes that sentences in previous translations can be recycled, right? But of course, in translation, a lot depends on the context, right? So a guiding principle of translation is that the translator must translate the message of the text and not its component sentences, right? So if we just focus on individual sentences or phrases, it doesn't take into account the whole context, right? So a given phrase or even sentence does not necessarily have to be translated in the same way in two different texts, because the context may be different, right? So of course this largely depends on what kind of text you're dealing with. Because if you, for example, have a legal document, then it's more likely then that the translation will be the same because of the strict and limited nature of legal language, right? But if you have something more creative, of course, this could be this could cause some problems. Okay, are there any other serious drawbacks? The learning curve, of course. So if you have to learn an application in able to be used, the translation memory manager, then of course that's a drawback. However, usually if you are a translator and you continue translating a lot of text, probably this will pay off in the long term. Unless you decide to change the application, right, and then you have to learn again. Right. Although the general concept of translation memories is quite similar in each application, so probably once you've learned one application, then using another is much easier. Of course, there is also the question of cost, right? That some professional memory managers can be expensive, of course, right? And there are other problems, but in general, it's good to be able to use such a tool and to actually start using it when doing some serious translation, right? So we look at that when we talk about Smartcat. All right, so let's look at Smartcat, which is a CAT tool that uses translation memories. So it's an online tool, which means you don't need to install anybody. Everything is in the cloud. All your work is saved automatically. So when you log back in, all the previous work is there. And of course, this is, you can see pricing here, right? Which means this isn't a completely free tool, but it has a free tier, right? A free level, which means you can use it for free, and you need to pay for more advanced functions, right? So we'll look at that. So So the address is smartcat.ai, or you can just Google Smartcat without any spaces, and you should be able to find it easily. So of course, first you need to create an account, right? So you need to click here, you need to enter some basic data, your email, your name, and then you just confirm your account. Of course, you choose your password, and then you can get started, right? So I've already got an account. So actually I created a new account for this session so that I can show you how this tool looks when you start working, right? Because there is a tutorial project that we're going to do in order to learn the tool, right? So I'm going to sign in with my credentials. Okay, and this is what it looks like, right? You will see this project here called Your Name Explores Smartcat. Okay, so here you see you've got a document created already, right? So this is inside the project. You can go to the project, or you can open the document, right? So you can see the document is within or inside the project, right? So yeah, so you can open it from here, and this will open in a new tab, right? Okay, and you see some hints. So this is the tutorial mode, so to speak. So the source column contains the original text split into sentences, right? So that's how these managers usually work. So you've got the source sentences, so the sentences to be translated from the source text, and these sentences, so the text is split into sentences, right? And the whole translation memory works on sentence level. That's why it was mentioned on Wikipedia that that can be a problem sometimes, right? Because it translates on sentence level and not a larger, not in a larger context, so to speak, right? Although it probably depends on the actual application, because maybe some applications work on paragraph level. But anyway, I'm digressing. So we've got these sentences. The text is divided into sentences. Okay, so of course this is the target field. So this is the field where you enter the translated sentences, right? And you've got the confirm button, so you confirm the translation of each segment, right? So basically, you're telling the application, this is, this is my translation of this sentence. Okay, so I finished. Okay, and now I would like you to do this on your own, right? Because if you just follow what I do, then probably you will not, this will not be as beneficial, because the idea is here that you should do it on your own, just following the instructions, right? Trying to work it out. And yeah, basically complete this translation using these suggestions, right? So basically the idea is that this source text, the text that you're supposed to translate, gives you the instructions at the same time, right? So for example, the first sentence says, hey there, translate this sentence and press Control Enter. So what you do is try to translate it into Polish, right? So yeah, so of course, even if the translation isn't perfect, you will be able to change it later. Obviously, you can edit it as long as you like, right? But that's the idea. You just translate these sentences. So you would start and say, for example, so how would we translate "Hey there"? Just "Cześć", "Witaj", maybe. Przetłumacz to zdanie i naciśnij Control Enter, right? So that's what you do, okay? And if you press Enter, you go to the next sentence, right? However, you still haven't accepted this this translation because this is not ticked, right? So for if you wanted to accept it, you would just click here, right? You would click this confirm the segment. So that's how you confirm the translation. But here you're just typing it in, which means this is still just temporary. It's just a version, right? You can still it's not entered as a valid translation into the memory, right? Basically, that's what it means, right? Okay, so as I said, I'm not going to do it now. Maybe I'll record another video where I actually go over this so that you can see if it looks the same or if it, you know, if the process has been the same as what you've experienced. But that's your task, basically. Just do this process, follow the instructions, right? And see what comes out. So basically, just translate this, and then I will give you an assignment where you will have to submit the translated text in a document, because of course after translating it you'll be able to export it as a document, obviously, right? So probably that's what we'll do. I will probably also show you the process as I go through it, but that's in a future video. Thank you.